On the day of my sister's wedding, my parents and sister completely ignored me. I said congratulations, but she wouldn't even look at me. When I found out the reason, I quietly left the ceremony. An hour later, their calls started pouring in one after another. I turned off my phone and smiled silently. The morning of Rebecca's wedding started like any other family catastrophe in the making. I should have seen it coming. Honestly, the past 3 months had been a whirlwind of dress fittings, venue tastings, and seating chart arguments that somehow always managed to put me in the worst possible position. Today, I'd been relegated to table 14, sandwiched between my Aunt Carol, who talked exclusively about her cats, and my parents' accountant, Gerald, who I'd met exactly once in my entire 28 years. But I showed up anyway, wearing the bridesmaid dress that Rebecca had chosen in a shade of mustard yellow that made my complexion look like I had jaundice. The dress had cost me $400, which was almost half of my monthly rent. I'd driven 3 hours from Chicago to this overpriced vineyard in the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin, taking time off from my job at the marketing firm where I'd just been promoted to senior account manager. My boss hadn't been thrilled about me missing the Hendricks presentation, but family comes first, right? That's what I'd always believed anyway. That's what Mom and Dad had drilled into Rebecca and me since we were kids, growing up in our modest suburban home in Neatville. Family first, family always, blood is thicker than water, and all those other platitudes that sounded meaningful until you realized they only applied selectively. I arrived at the bridal suite at exactly 8 in the morning, just like Rebecca had demanded in her 17-page wedding day itinerary. Yes, 17 pages. She'd sent it via email with read receipts enabled, so she'd know if anyone hadn't opened it. I printed mine out and highlighted all my responsibilities in pink, studying it like it was the LSAT all over again. The door to the suite was partially open, and I could hear champagne glasses clinking and laughter spilling out into the hallway. I knocked twice before entering my arms, laden with the emergency kit Rebecca had insisted I bring. Inside the kit were safety pins, fashion tape, clear nail polish, breath mints, tissues, Advil Tums, a sewing kit stain, remover deodorant, and about 15 other items she'd texted me about at 2 in the morning throughout the previous week. "Hey everyone," I called out, pushing the door open with my hip. "I've got the emergency supplies." The laughter stopped, not gradually, but like someone had hit a pause button on the entire room. Rebecca stood in front of the full-length mirror in her white silk robe, her hair already curled and pinned by Meredith, her maid of honor and best friend since college. My mother sat on the velvet settee near the window, already in her navy mother-of-the-bride dress holding a mimosa. 3 other bridesmaids, all friends of Rebecca's from her sorority days at Northwestern, were scattered around the room in various states of getting ready. Nobody said hello. Nobody even looked at me directly. "I'll just put this over here," I said, setting the bag down on the vanity table. The silence pressed against my eardrums like I was underwater. Traffic wasn't too bad. Made good time. Rebecca turned slightly, just enough that I could see her profile, but she still wouldn't make eye contact. She adjusted one of her earrings and then went back to examining herself in the mirror as if I were invisible. "Rebecca," I tried again. "The dress looks beautiful on you. Really, you look stunning." Nothing. She picked up her phone and started scrolling through something, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the screen. I looked at Mom, searching her face for some explanation. We just talked on the phone 3 days ago about what time I should arrive and whether I needed to bring anything else. She'd been warm, then asking about my new promotion and whether I was seeing anyone. But now she sipped her mimosa and gazed out the window of the vineyard, stretching into the distance, the morning sun catching the rows of grapevines. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. Meredith exchanged a glance with Courtney, one of the other bridesmaids. They both looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. The makeup artist who'd been hired for the day cleared her throat and busied herself organizing her brushes, suddenly fascinated by the difference between her angled shader and her fluffy blender. I brought everything on the list. I continued trying to fill the horrible silence with anything. The Tums are the extra strength ones. I got them at that pharmacy. You like the one near. We're running behind schedule. Rebecca interrupted, speaking to Meredith instead of me. Can you text the photographer and tell her to meet us downstairs in 20 instead of 30? I want to get the getting ready shots before my makeup starts to crease. Sure thing, Meredith chirped, pulling out her phone immediately. She was everything I wasn't. Tall, blonde, effortlessly beautiful from old money that she never talked about, but everyone knew was there. Her parents had actually paid for the rehearsal dinner last night. Some five-star restaurant where the cheapest entree was $65. I hadn't been invited to the rehearsal dinner. Rebecca had told me 2 weeks ago that it was going to be intimate. Just immediate family and the wedding party, but then I'd seen the photos on Instagram. 37 people had attended, including distant cousins I'd only met twice, and Rebecca's godmother who lived in Portland. But I'd swallowed that insult like I'd swallowed so many others over the years. I'd ordered myself Thai food and watched Netflix in my apartment, telling myself it wasn't personal, that wedding planning was stressful, that my sister still loved me, even if she didn't always show it in ways I understood. Do you need me to do anything? I asked, directing my question to the room at large since nobody seemed to be acknowledging me specifically. I'm here to help with whatever you need. The other bridesmaids, Sarah and Amanda, were now whispering to each other while looking at their phones. One of them stifled a giggle. The sound made my stomach clench. We're fine, Mom said finally her first words to me. Her voice was cold, clipped. She still wouldn't look directly at me. Why don't you go get yourself ready? Your dress is hanging in the bathroom. My dress? Right. The hideous mustard yellow monstrosity that apparently was meant to complement the rustic autumn elegance theme Rebecca had chosen. I tried it on at the fitting 2 months ago, and even the seamstress had winced when she saw how the color washed me out. Rebecca had just shrugged and said that the wedding aesthetic was more important than any individual person looking their best. I retrieved the dress from the bathroom and changed in one of the toilet stalls, not wanting to take up space in the main suite where I was clearly unwelcome. The dress fit perfectly, which somehow made it worse. At least if it hadn't fit, I'd have had an excuse to talk to someone to force some kind of interaction. When I emerged, everyone was posing for photos with Rebecca. The photographer, a woman in her 30s with sleeve tattoos and an expensive-looking camera, was directing them to look at Rebecca with joy and admiration. Beautiful. Now everyone laughed like she just said something hilarious. They all laughed en cue, perfect tinkling laughter that sounded genuine even though it wasn't. I hovered at the edge of the room, waiting for someone to call me into the frame, but the photographer just kept shooting. After about 50 photos, she finally noticed me. Oh, are you another bridesmaid? Come on in, honey. I stepped forward, trying to wedge myself into the group. Rebecca immediately shifted her body, creating a gap between us, even though we were supposed to be clustered together. In every photo, I could feel myself being subtly pushed to the edge, becoming less and less visible in the frame. After the photos, it was time to head down to the ceremony space. The wedding was being held in the vineyard's outdoor pavilion, a gorgeous structure with exposed wooden beams and strings of Edison bulbs that would look magical once the sun set. 250 guests were expected. Rebecca had spared no expense, and I knew Dad had taken out a significant loan to help pay for everything, even though he was only 3 years away from retirement. I'd offered to contribute. I'd even offered to help plan and coordinate things to save money on a wedding planner. Rebecca had laughed in my face. You plan my wedding, Selena, she'd said. You can barely remember to water your plants. That had been 6 months ago during one of our Sunday family dinners. Everyone had laughed because Rebecca knew how to make her cruelty sound like a joke. And maybe she'd been right. I had killed 3 succulents in the past year, which my mother liked to bring up whenever she wanted to suggest I wasn't responsible enough for serious adult commitments. But I'd still made that offer because I loved my sister. Or at least I loved the idea of the relationship we should have had. The one where we were close and confided in each other and braided each other's hair while talking about our dreams. The relationship that existed in every family sitcom, but apparently not in real life. The ceremony started at 3. Guests began filtering in around 2:30, dressed in their autumn wedding finest. I stood with the other bridesmaids near the back of the pavilion watching as people I'd known my entire life walked past me without saying hello. Neighbors from our childhood street, Dad's brother and his wife, my parents' friends from their book club. They all averted their eyes when they saw me, some whispered to each other. One woman, Mrs. Patterson from 2 doors down, actually gasped quietly and clutched her husband's arm as if seeing me had caused her physical distress. Something was very, very wrong. I could feel it in my bones now, the way you can feel a storm coming before you see the clouds. I pulled out my phone and opened Instagram. Rebecca's account was public, and she'd been posting wedding updates constantly. Her most recent post was from 40 minutes ago. A photo of her in her wedding dress with the caption, "Can't wait to celebrate with real family and friends today. No room for negativity, only love and light. Real family." The words hit me like a slap. I scrolled down looking at the comments. Most were congratulatory, filled with heart emojis and exclamation points. But then I saw one from my cousin Jennifer. "So proud of you for standing up for yourself. Some people don't deserve to be there anyway." My hands started shaking. I clicked over to Rebecca's stories, something I rarely did because watching my sister's curated life usually just made me feel inadequate. The first few were typical wedding content. Shots of the venue boomerangs of champagne pours her makeup artist applying her lipstick. Then I got to a story from last night. It was a video taken at the rehearsal dinner I hadn't been invited to. Rebecca was standing at what looked like a podium holding a microphone, clearly giving some kind of speech. I turned up my volume, pressing my phone close to my ear to hear over the ambient noise of guests arriving. "And I just want to say thank you to everyone who's here tonight," Rebecca was saying, her voice slightly slurred from alcohol. "My real friends and family, the people who actually support me and love me unconditionally. Not like some people who pretend to be happy for you while secretly being jealous and bitter." The camera swung around the room, showing people nodding and raising their glasses. Then it swung back to Rebecca. "And you all know who I'm talking about," she continued, and the crowd laughed. "My sister couldn't even be bothered to show up tonight because she's too jealous that I'm getting married, and she's still single. She's been trying to sabotage my wedding for months, making everything about her, complaining about every decision I make. Well, I'm done making excuses for her. She's only invited tomorrow because my parents insisted, but as far as I'm concerned, she's not really part of this family anymore." The video ended. The next story was a cheerful shot of dessert being served as if she hadn't just publicly eviscerated me to everyone who mattered in our lives. My vision blurred. I had to watch the video 3 more times to make sure I'd understood correctly. The worst part was that none of it was true. I hadn't complained about her decisions. I'd agreed to the expensive dress, the inconvenient dress fittings, the bridesmaid duties that had taken up every spare weekend for the past 4 months. I'd thrown her a bridal shower, which had cost me $800 I didn't have. I'd organized her bachelorette party in Nashville, coordinating travel and accommodations for 12 women, only to be mocked the entire weekend for my boring activity suggestions. And I certainly hadn't been jealous of her engagement to Trevor, her fiancé of 2 years. Trevor worked in finance and had the personality of unbuttered toast. He was fine, perfectly adequate, but he talked exclusively about crypto and CrossFit. And I'd never once seen him ask Rebecca a meaningful question about her life or her feelings. He treated her like a trophy, something pretty to show off at work functions. But Rebecca was happy, so I'd been happy for her, or I tried to be anyway. Now everyone thought I was the bitter, jealous sister who tried to ruin the wedding. Everyone thought I'd skipped the rehearsal dinner out of spite, not because I'd been deliberately excluded. Everyone looked at me like I was the villain in a story I didn't even know I was part of. The ceremony was about to start. The groomsmen were lining up and a coordinator in a headset was organizing us bridesmaids in order. I was last in line because of course I was. Meredith was first as maid of honor. Then came Courtney, Sarah, Amanda, and finally me. "Okay, ladies, you know the drill," the coordinator said, her voice bright and professional. Walk slowly, count to 5 between each person. Keep your bouquets at belly button height and smile. This is a happy day. The music started. A string quartet began playing some classical piece I didn't recognize. Meredith started her walk down the aisle, her smile radiant. The crowd oohed and awed. Then Courtney, then Sarah, then Amanda. Then it was my turn. I stepped forward, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Every pair of eyes in that pavilion turned to look at me, and I could see the judgment written on every face. Some people actually frowned, others whispered to their neighbors, not even bothering to hide their disdain. I walked down the aisle holding my bouquet of orange roses and bronze chrysanthemums, my heels clicking against the wooden pathway. The walk felt like it took hours. When I reached the front and took my place at the end of the bridesmaid line, I was shaking. Dad was waiting at the back of the pavilion with Rebecca. Through the corner of my eye, I watched as she took his arm. The music swelled into the bridal march. Everyone stood. Rebecca appeared at the top of the aisle in her dress, a stunning mermaid-style gown with delicate lace appliques and a cathedral train that must have cost more than my car. She looked beautiful. She really did. And despite everything, despite the humiliation and the pain radiating through my chest, I felt a genuine spark of happiness for her in that moment. Because that's what you're supposed to feel when your sister gets married, right? You're supposed to put aside your own hurt and celebrate her joy. They walked down the aisle together, Dad looking proud and distinguished, in his tuxedo. When they reached the front, he kissed Rebecca's cheek and handed her off to Trevor, who waited with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Rebecca passed her bouquet to Meredith without even glancing in my direction. The officiant, a friend of Trevor's from business school, began the ceremony with some generic remarks about love and commitment and partnership. I tried to focus on his words, but my mind kept drifting back to that video. My sister had publicly declared that I wasn't really part of the family anymore, and my parents had done nothing to stop her. They'd gone along with it, believed whatever lies she told them about me. The ceremony continued. There were readings from Elizabeth Barrett Browning and Rumi. Trevor's brother told an embarrassing story about Trevor accidentally dyeing his hair green in high school. Everyone laughed. Rebecca and Trevor exchanged their vows, the traditional ones from the Episcopal prayer book. Nothing personal or specific, just the standard words that thousands of couples spoke every year. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the officiant declared. "You may kiss the bride." They kissed. Everyone clapped and cheered. The string quartet launched into something upbeat and celebratory. Rebecca and Trevor turned to face the crowd, holding hands and beaming. They began the recessional walk back down the aisle, waving to guests like celebrities at a movie premiere. As they passed the bridesmaids, Rebecca's eyes finally landed on me. I'd been waiting for this moment, hoping that in the joy of getting married, she might soften. I smiled at her, genuine and warm. "Congratulations," I said, loud enough for her to hear over the music. She looked right through me. Her gaze moved past me like I was a piece of furniture, something irrelevant and unworthy of acknowledgement. Then she was gone, walking past me in a blur of white fabric and flowers. That was the moment something inside me cracked. Not broke, exactly. Cracked. Like a windshield that's been hit by a rock spider webbing out from a single point of impact. I followed the other bridesmaids back down the aisle for the recessional. The crowd was still clapping, still celebrating. Nobody looked at me except with that same expression of distaste, like I was something unpleasant they'd rather not think about. At the back of the pavilion, there was chaos as the wedding party clustered for photos. The photographer was shouting instructions, trying to organize everyone. "Okay, I need all the bridesmaids and groomsmen with the bride and groom. Let's get some fun candids." I stood on the periphery waiting to be called in, but the photographer just kept positioning people in various arrangements. After about 10 minutes, she finally seemed satisfied. Great. "Okay, now we need family photos. Can we have the parents up here?" Mom and Dad moved forward along with Trevor's parents, whom I'd met only twice before. More photos, more posing, more fake. laughter, and forced smiles. Okay, now just the bride's side of the family. The photographer called. This was it. This was when I'd be included. I stepped forward, but Meredith's hand landed gently on my arm, stopping me. Actually, she said quietly, not meeting my eyes, Rebecca asked for just her and your parents for the family photos. She said you'd understand. The crack in my windshield spread further. I could almost hear the sound of it, that subtle cracking noise glass makes right before it shatters completely. Right? I said, my voice hollow. Of course. I watched as my mother, my father, and my sister posed together, just the three of them. The photographer kept saying things like, "What a beautiful family," and you can really see the resemblance. Meanwhile, I stood 20 feet away next to a decorative hay bale, invisible. Guests were starting to move toward the reception barn on the other side of the property. The cocktail hour was beginning, and servers were circulating with trays of bacon-wrapped dates and mini crab cakes. I could see the barn through the trees, all lit up with those same Edison bulbs. From here it looked magical, inviting, like the kind of place where good memories were made. But I wouldn't make good memories there. I would sit at table 14 with Aunt Carol and Gerald, the accountant being ignored and despised by everyone who mattered. I would watch my sister dance with our father, the two of them laughing and hugging while I sat in the corner, cut out of every meaningful moment. I would force down the rubber chicken or dry salmon that was inevitably served at these things, making small talk with people who didn't want to talk to me. And for what? What was I proving by saying that I could endure humiliation? That I was the bigger person? That family meant something to me, even when it clearly meant nothing to them. I pulled out my phone and opened my Uber app. The reception barn was visible in the distance, but I started walking in the opposite direction toward the vineyard's parking lot. My fingers trembled as I requested a ride, a black Honda Accord 17 minutes away. Driver's name was Marcus. 5-star rating. I walked past clusters of guests enjoying their cocktails, past the fire pits that had been set up for ambiance, past the vintage photo booth and the lawn games and all the expensive decorations that were meant to make this day Instagram perfect. Nobody stopped me. Nobody asked where I was going. I was a ghost at my own sister's wedding, and nobody cared enough to notice when the ghost decided to leave. I made it to the parking lot and found a bench near the entrance. My dress looked ridiculous in the afternoon sunlight. The mustard yellow even more hideous than I'd remembered. $400 for a dress I'd wear once, and then never think about again. Marcus arrived right on schedule. He was a middle-aged black man, with kind eyes and a pine-scented air freshener hanging from his rear-view mirror. "Wedding?" he asked as I climbed into the back seat. "Something like that," I said. He didn't push for more information, which I appreciated. He just nodded and started driving. I'd requested a ride to the nearest train station. From there I could take the commuter rail back to Chicago. It would take hours, and I'd probably get home around midnight, but I didn't care. I needed to be anywhere but here. My phone stayed blessedly silent for the first 40 minutes. I watched the Wisconsin countryside roll past all those farms and small towns that dotted the landscape. Marcus played soft jazz on the radio. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. We pulled up to the train station in Glenwood. I thanked Marcus, gave him a generous tip because he'd been mercifully quiet during the drive, and headed inside. The next train to Chicago wasn't for another 90 minutes, so I bought myself a coffee from the vending machine and sat on a bench to wait. Then my phone started ringing. Mom's name flashed across the screen. I declined the call. 30 seconds later, she called again. Decline, then Dad, decline, then Rebecca. That one almost made me laugh. She'd ignored me all day, publicly humiliated me, excluded me from her family, and now she wanted to talk. Decline, then Mom again and again. The calls were coming rapid fire now, one after another. Between calls, texts started rolling in. Mom, where are you? Mom. Selena, answer your phone right now. Mom, this is completely unacceptable. Dad, your sister is very upset. You need to come back. Rebecca, are you seriously doing this on my wedding day? Rebecca, everyone is asking where you are. You're embarrassing me, Mom. We need to talk about this. Don't be childish. I read each message as it came in, feeling strangely detached from the whole situation. Childish? They thought I was being childish. After everything they'd done, everything they'd allowed to happen. More calls. I declined them all. My phone was vibrating constantly, now, like it was having a seizure. Even Meredith called, which was bold, considering she'd been complicit in excluding me from the family photos. Finally, I opened my phone settings and turned it off completely. The screen went dark. The vibrating stopped. Silence descended like a blanket, soft and merciful. I sat there in that dingy train station, surrounded by a handful of other travelers who were all absorbed in their own phones and their own problems. My ridiculous mustard dress drew a few curious looks, but nobody asked any questions. I sipped my terrible coffee and felt lighter than I had in months. 'Cause here's the thing I'd finally figured out. I'd been trying so hard to be part of a family that didn't want me. I'd been bending over backward, making myself smaller, accepting scraps of affection and calling it love. I'd been the family punching bag, the one everyone could blame and dismiss and ignore, all while maintaining the fiction that we were close, that we cared about each other. But we weren't close. We didn't care. And the only person who hadn't figured that out yet had been me. I thought about all the years of little moments that had led to this. The Christmas when Rebecca got a car and I got a gift card to Target. The time Mom forgot my college graduation because Rebecca had a minor surgery scheduled the same day. The countless family dinners where Rebecca's accomplishments were celebrated while mine were dismissed with a quick, "That's nice, honey," before the conversation moved on. I'd always made excuses. Mom was stressed. Dad was working too much. Rebecca was going through something difficult. There was always a reason why I came second, why my feelings didn't matter as much, why I should be understanding and patient. But understanding and patience are only virtues when they are reciprocated. Otherwise, they're just tools people use to keep you compliant while they mistreat you. My train finally arrived, and I felt a wave of relief as I boarded. I found a window seat in a nearly empty car. As the train started moving, I looked out at the darkening landscape and felt a smile tugging at my lips. They were probably panicking right now. The reception would be in full swing. Dinner being served, toast being given, but one bridesmaid was missing, and everyone knew it. They'd have to explain my absence. They'd have to address the obvious elephant in the room. I imagined the scene playing out, the coordinator in her headset, frantically searching the grounds, checking bathrooms and quiet corners where I might have escaped to cry. Meredith being dispatched to find me, her annoyance barely concealed because my disappearance was inconveniencing her timeline for toasts. Mom gripping her wine glass too tightly, that vein in her forehead pulsing the way it did when she was angry but trying to maintain appearances. And Rebecca would be furious. This was her day, her perfectly orchestrated event, and I'd gone off script in the worst possible way. I could picture her face. That expression she got when things didn't go exactly as she'd planned. Her jaw would be tight, her smile frozen in place for the photographers, while her eyes blazed with rage. Part of me felt guilty. That was the worst part. Honestly, even after everything, even knowing how they treated me, there was still that small voice in my head saying, I should have stayed, that I should have been the bigger person, that walking out was dramatic and attention-seeking and proved them right about me being problematic. But that voice was getting quieter with every mile the train traveled because being the bigger person had never actually gotten me anywhere. It had just taught them that they could treat me however they wanted, and I'd still show up, still smile, still pretend everything was fine. The train car was peaceful. An elderly couple sat a few rows ahead, speaking softly in Spanish. A college kid with headphones was sleeping against the window across the aisle. Normal people living their normal lives, none of them knowing that the woman in the ridiculous yellow dress had just walked out on her sister's wedding. My thoughts drifted to Trevor. Poor Trevor. Did he even know what kind of family he was marrying into? Did he see how Rebecca treated people when she didn't get her way? Or was he just as complicit, just as willing to go along with her cruelty, as long as it wasn't directed at him. I remembered the one conversation I'd had with Trevor alone about 6 months ago at a family barbecue. He'd cornered me by the grill while everyone else was inside and asked me what Rebecca was like as a kid. It was such a strange question coming from someone who was about to marry her. She was determined, I'd said carefully, not wanting to badmouth my sister to her fiancé. When she wanted something, she found a way to get it. Trevor had nodded, taking a long drink from his beer. Yeah, that tracks. She's very goal-oriented. Goal-oriented? That was one way to describe it. Another way would be ruthless, manipulative, willing to bulldoze anyone who got in her way. But I didn't say that. I never said that. Are you happy? I'd asked him instead. It had slipped out before I could stop myself. He'd looked at me with this confused expression like the question didn't make sense. Of course, why wouldn't I be? And I'd let it drop because it wasn't my place to interrogate my sister's fiancé about the state of their relationship. But I'd wondered in that moment if Trevor actually knew what happiness felt like, or if he just knew what success looked like and confused the two. The train swayed gently as it curved around a bend. I checked my watch. 7:30. Dinner service would be starting soon. They'd seated me between Aunt Carol and Gerald for a reason. I realize now, not just because I was low priority, but because those were the two people least likely to ask questions about family drama. Aunt Carol would talk about Mr. Whiskers and Princess Fluffington the entire time, and Gerald would probably try to explain tax law between courses. I would have been effectively isolated even while surrounded by 250 people. It was clever, actually, cruel, but clever. Keep me present so no one could accuse them of completely excluding me, but make sure I was too uncomfortable and ignored to actually enjoy myself or connect with anyone. Maximum humiliation with plausible deniability. But they'd miscalculated. They'd assumed I'd just take it the way I'd taken everything else over the years. They'd assumed I'd swallow my hurt paste on a smile and play my role in their perfect family fantasy. The thing about being ignored your whole life is that eventually you get really good at disappearing. They trained me to be invisible, and now they were shocked that I'd actually vanished. My stomach growled. I'd been too nervous to eat breakfast, and I'd skipped lunch entirely because of all the pre-ceremony chaos. The train had a cafe car, so I made my way down the aisle, studying myself against the seats as the train rocked. The cafe car was small and fluorescent, lit with a tired L-looking attendant reading a paperback behind the counter. I ordered a turkey sandwich and a bag of chips paid with my credit card and took my sad little dinner back to my seat. The sandwich was dry and the chips were stale, but it was the best meal I'd had in months because it was mine. I'd chosen it. Nobody had dictated what I could eat or when or where. Nobody was judging my choices or making passive-aggressive comments about my weight or my eating habits. Freedom. I was learning sometimes tasted like a mediocre train station sandwich. Maybe they'd blame me. Tell everyone I was unstable or dramatic. Maybe they'd make up some excuse about a family emergency. Or maybe, just maybe, a few people would see through the lies and wonder what had really happened. Why would someone leave their sister's wedding unless something was seriously wrong? I'd spent my whole life trying to earn my family's love, trying to be good enough, accomplished enough, helpful enough, but their love had always been conditional, offered sparingly, and withdrawn the moment I failed to meet their impossible standards. So, I was done trying, done begging for scraps, done pretending that the way they treated me was normal or acceptable or something I should tolerate because family is family. The train picked up speed, carrying me away from that vineyard and that wedding and that life I'd been trying so desperately to fit into. My phone was still off, sitting dark and silent in my purse. They were probably still calling, still texting, still demanding that I explain myself and apologize and come back and play my role in their perfect family tableau. But I wasn't going back. Not tonight, not tomorrow. Maybe not ever. At least not in the way they expected. Because I'd finally understood something crucial. The only thing worse than not having a family is having one that makes you feel alone. The train hummed beneath me, steady and sure, heading toward the city, where I'd built a life they barely acknowledged, a job I was good at, friends who actually liked me, An apartment that was small, but mine. A future that didn't require me to shrink myself down to fit into someone else's idea of who I should be. I leaned my head against the window and let myself smile fully now. A real smile that came from somewhere deep in my chest. It wasn't a happy smile exactly. It was something more complicated than that. Relief, maybe, or the quiet satisfaction of finally choosing myself. The landscape rushed past in the darkness. Somewhere behind me, a wedding reception continued without me. Somewhere behind me, phones rang unanswered and texts piled up unread. Somewhere behind me, people were realizing that you can't ignore someone completely and then expect them to stick around. But I wasn't somewhere behind me anymore. I was here on this train, in this moment, wearing this ridiculous yellow dress and drinking terrible coffee and feeling more myself than I had in years. And that, I realized, was its own kind of revenge. Not the dramatic, explosive kind that made for good stories, but the quiet, powerful kind that came from simply refusing to accept unacceptable treatment anymore. They'd call tomorrow. They'd demand explanations. They'd probably try to make me feel guilty. Tell me I'd ruined Rebecca's special day. Accused me of being selfish and unreasonable, but I'd already decided my response. I'd tell them the truth. That you can't treat someone like they're worthless and then be surprised when they start believing it. That ignoring someone all day and then expecting them to smile through dinner isn't reasonable. It's cruel. That I was done being the family scapegoat, the convenient target for whatever frustrations and insecurities they needed to project onto someone. The train pulled into Union Station a little after 11 o'clock. I took another Uber home. This driver, a quiet woman who asked no questions about the wedding dress. I climbed the 3 flights of stairs to my apartment, kicked off those terrible heels, and collapsed onto my couch. My phone was still off. I plugged it in to charge, but didn't turn it on. I deal with the fallout tomorrow or the day after, or whenever I felt ready. Right now, I just wanted to sit in the silence and feel the strange, surprising peace that came with finally walking away. Because sometimes the only way to save yourself is to leave. Even if it's your sister's wedding, even if everyone will judge you, even if it means burning bridges with people who are supposed to love you unconditionally. Sometimes you have to choose yourself, even when no one else will. And as I sat there in my quiet apartment, still wearing that ridiculous dress, I realized I'd made the right choice. Maybe the only choice that made any sense. I thought about that video of Rebecca, drunk and cruel, declaring that I wasn't really part of the family. And I thought about how desperately I'd wanted to prove her wrong, to show up and be present and demonstrate that I did belong. But belonging isn't something you can force, and a family that requires you to erase yourself in order to be accepted isn't actually a family at all. So I sat there in this darkness, my phone charging silently on the counter, dozens of missed calls and messages waiting for me whenever I decided to face them. And I smiled, that complicated smile again, the one that meant I'd finally figured out what I should have known all along. That I deserved better. That I'd always deserved better. That it was never too late to start acting like it. The train hummed beneath me earlier, but now my apartment was silent, except for the low buzz of the refrigerator and the distant sounds of traffic outside my window. I sat there longer than I expected, letting the quiet sink into my bones. The dress still felt stiff against my skin. The fabric heavy and unfamiliar, like it belonged to a version of me I was finally ready to leave behind. I didn't cry. That surprised me the most. I'd expected tears, some dramatic release, but instead there was only calm. Not peace exactly, but clarity. The kind that comes after you finally stop arguing with reality. They would wake up tomorrow and spin the story however they needed to. Rebecca would say I'd overreacted. Mom would say she didn't understand where things went wrong. Dad would say nothing at all because silence had always been his preferred form of damage control. They would agree on one thing, though, that this was my fault. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the urge to correct them. I went to the bathroom and carefully unzipped the dress, stepping out of it like I was shedding a skin. I hung it in the back of my closet where it would stay until I eventually donated it or threw it away. $400 gone. But the cost didn't sting the way it once would have. I changed into an old t-shirt and sweatpants, washed my face, and looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were tired, my makeup smudged, but there was something steadier there than I'd seen in years. I went back into the living room and sat down again, my phone still dark on the counter. I didn't turn it on. Not yet. I wanted to remember this feeling, this quiet, this sense of choosing myself without immediately explaining or justifying it to anyone else. Because for once, I didn't need their permission. I lay back on the couch and stared at the ceiling, thinking about what came next. There would be difficult conversations. There would be anger. There would be guilt because guilt had been programmed into me from childhood. But there would also be boundaries, real ones I wouldn't apologize for. Rebecca had said I wasn't really part of the family anymore. Maybe she was right. And maybe that wasn't the insult she thought it was. Because if this was what being part of the family meant, being invisible, being disposable, being humiliated for someone else's comfort, then I didn't want it anymore. I closed my eyes and let myself rest, knowing that when I woke up, my life would keep moving forward. Not perfectly, not easily, but honestly.